So let's talk wire. I've got a variety of wires here. I've got sterling silver, I've got brass, I've got copper, I've got colored craft wires, and I've just got plain, very inexpensive craft wire because I want you to know that it's important when you're practicing and playing around that the craft wires exist and they're much more inexpensive. Another wire I love working with that's inexpensive and also beautiful is steel wire. Take a look at this necklace here, this bracelet here, even this bracelet here. All of those I use steel wire, which has a beautiful denseness to it. Wire comes in different hardnesses called dead soft and half hard. Dead soft is easier to bend and manipulate, and half hard keeps its shape better because it's stiffer. But you can also make wire stiffer by work hardening it, which is hammering it or bending it a lot. We'll talk more about work hardening in a bit. Wire is measured in gauge. Now, gauge can be kind of counterintuitive because the lower the number, the heavier the gauge. For instance, 14 gauge, this is 14 gauge copper wire. You'll see how heavy that is. Whereas here's 24 gauge, which is very thin and narrow. Thicker wire, for instance, 14 gauge, 12 gauge, only comes in dead soft because it's so thick that if it were half hard, it would really be too stiff even for you to handle. I like to use 14 gauge, 12 gauge when I need something really hefty. Say I'm making a neck wire or maybe a bangle for a bracelet or designs that I want to have a very substantial look. When I'm making clasps, I usually use 16 and 18 gauge wire. And these are also good sizes for making substantial jump rings. I keep lots of 20 gauge wire on hand because this is the standard ear wire gauge. 20 and 22 gauge wire are also commonly used for head pins and eye pins. And then thinner wires, such as this 24 gauge, look how nice and thin it is, also have their place in lots of design. I'll use it, for instance, in coiling around just a little small coil in a ring to give a little embellishment. Using a variety of gauges in a single piece can add to the visual intrigue. All right, so let's talk tools, and I got to tell you, I am a tool girl. Quality makes a huge difference in your tools. Well-made, ergonomically designed handles enable you to get a good grip, and well-crafted jaws are essential to making good work and a pleasure to work with. You'll want to think about you can get a longer handle, a shorter handle. It's just a matter of preferences. But I got to tell you, your hands will know the difference even if your eyes don't know the difference. Pliers come in different forms. We use them to hold, to bend, to shape, to texture, and to move wire around. Chain nose, flat nose, bent nose pliers, they all have jaws to hold, bend, and shape wire. Sometimes when I want to get a good grip on wire, or when I want to straighten wire, I use my nylon jawed pliers. I'll show you more about how to work with those. Sometimes you'll find when you're working with wire and working with pliers, it's a challenge not to mar your wire. Well, you may want to use Tool Magic, which is a substance that you can dip a pair of pliers in and you'll get kind of a plastic coating on your pliers. You keep using it till it gets too beat up, then you just peel it off and dip your pliers into Tool Magic again. You'll like that. Another tool I use to work with wire, to texture it and to file it softer, is sandpaper and files. You'll notice I have just these little nail files. They really do work beautifully, and they're very comfortable to hold. I find often people prefer using these to the metal files. Flush cutters for cutting wire. Why do I have several sizes? Because different size wire needs different size cutters, and oh my goodness, let me tell you something. It's important to think about what metal you're using. Steel wire is much stronger than, say, stainless steel or copper. You want to think about if there's an argument between your pliers and your wire, whoever is strongest wins. So if you use cutters on a wire that is stronger than your cutters, you're going to mar your cutters. So it's very important to pay attention to what kind of cutter to use with what kind of wire. We'll talk about that more. You're probably wondering why I have a wire whisk here. That's because here's a mandrel, and I use a mandrel to make rings, but I know sometimes when you're beginning in wire, you don't necessarily feel like buying a lot of tools, particularly expensive tools. Well, look at this. I can form a ring around that too. So you might want to use a wire whisk for all of your ring shaping and big curling wire needs. Hammers. We're going to talk about all different kinds of hammers to form and shape. Once again, quality really makes a difference. Sometimes you'll pick up a hammer and you'll say, ah, because that handle really feels good. Once again, a well-crafted, ergonomically designed hammer is going to make your life a lot easier. This is a bench block. I use that when I'm going to pound my wire. And then when I do that, it can get rather loud, and so I always have a bench block pad. That's simply to dull the noise, but also to absorb the shock. Just makes it easier when I'm hammering.